How did you survive?
I don't know. I really shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here. Should not be here.
It's finals week at the University of Delaware, and students are busy cramming for their upcoming exams. While they spend their days concerned about good grades, they're not aware of what dark events are happening behind closed doors. My name is Sanskriti Rayavarapu, and for the last 3 months, I've worked with Javier Aguiar and Sean Hinton to dig deeper into the realities of sex trafficking in Delaware. I think that we should go talk to Yolanda Slava. She's one of the most well-known anti-trafficking activists in Delaware, and I really think that she could shed some light on this issue. What exactly is sex trafficking then?
So basically, it's forcing somebody to have sex in exchange for something else, and they're being controlled by a perpetrator or a trafficker who controls all of the resources, the freedom of movement, the ID and the documents, the food, the shelter, the drugs, if they're addicted to substances. So basically, they are in control of somebody else's life and movement and money, and they're forcing somebody to engage in commercial sex against their will.
I think that we should talk to a survivor because I think it's the only way that we're going to understand the depth of sex trafficking and what that really means.
A 15-year-old girl, alone, confused, sad, addicted, and trafficked on the streets of New York City.
I understand that you've had some very tough life experiences, and I wanted to know if you'd be willing to share your story with me.
The summer I turned 12, I ran away from my Fairfax, Virginia home. And like so many other victims of trauma, I just was trying to get away. And I was experiencing things in my home that no child ever should. So I began to run away, and I ran away many times in those first several months. I ran away and I ran away and I ran away. And I ended up going through all the systems, the juvenile justice system, the foster care system, and multiple systems. So I was labeled incorrigible and uncontrollable, which is hysterically funny because I was obviously controllable. I was controlled by a trafficker eventually. So she began taking me to different places in Washington, D.C. for purposes of prostitution. I never saw the money. They collected the money. Money meant nothing to me because I was a 12-year-old kid. And I mean, I probably would have robbed a bank if they wanted me to because I was very vulnerable and all I wanted was someone to care about me. And that's what traffickers prey upon, that vulnerability.
I had the chance to meet up with local activists Sandy and Deanna, and here's what they had to say about the issue.
I'm Sandy Bowman. I'm the Vice President, and I also am the Chair for Outreach and Community Education for the Meet Me at the Well Foundation.
My name is Diana Suchodolski, and my background is with public policy. Right now, I am on the board for Meet Me at the Well with Sandy, working to do anti-human trafficking work and advocacy and supporting legislation. I'm also on the Human Trafficking Interagency Coordinating Council as a planner and administrator.
I hear the term sex trafficking and human trafficking. Is there a difference between the two?
So human trafficking encompasses a wide range of different types of trafficking. There's labor trafficking, there's sex trafficking, there's also trafficking of body parts. And sex trafficking specifically deals with the force, fraud, or coercion between 3 people, including the buyer, what would be considered the prostitute or the victim, and then the handler or the pimp or the trafficker. So once those 3 people are involved, you have trafficking. And then being able to prove force, fraud, or coercion is the legal term for sex trafficking.
Oftentimes in trafficking, the victim is looked at as the criminal. And I think that, as you said, like victims, it's not a safe spot right now for them to come out. And I think that might be why trafficking is so prevalent in not just Delaware, but in every state in this country.
Absolutely.
And so it's something that I'm happy that you're speaking about.
Thank you.
There was a recent trafficking case that was reported by the Newark Post, which involved a 15-year-old girl. This girl was being trafficked in motels in Newark, and also in Elkton, Maryland, which is just within a few miles of right where we're sitting right now. How does that make you feel?
Um, it it's upsetting, and it makes me afraid. I'm a parent, and seeing that the occasions of sex trafficking are increasing. The fact that it's kind of a silent issue in this state. People still will laugh when I am worried about my daughter, and I tell people you should prepare your child as well for these things, because people don't take it seriously. They don't realize how close to home it is. And even with this recent case, even with it being in our paper, it still isn't amplified enough. And part of it, I think, is on purpose. I think that there is a benefit to administrations, whether it is elected officials at the state level or local levels, to keep it quiet because you don't want to scare people. You sent me an article. Actually, it was the TED Talk of Yolanda, and she spoke about the life expectancy being 7 years. If the life expectancy is 7 years, that's an epidemic, right? And if it's happening in large amounts, we need to sound the alarms. And so my concern is in our state is that we're not speaking up enough. And when I hear about this story, it scares me. When I hear about stories happening in Georgetown, it scares me because nobody's saying it. And you'll hear it in small circles that are fully committed to the cause, and everybody else acts as if it's not happening. So when I hear it, I hear the fact that there is a deafening silence.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it. My first question, would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself?
Oh, absolutely. So my name is Rita Landgraf, and I, throughout my career, have basically served vulnerable populations. My most significant career opportunity was in serving as Delaware's Cabinet Secretary for the Department of Health and Social Services.
How long have you been involved with anti-trafficking efforts?
So the human trafficking really came to our attention actually in state government, I'm going to say probably about 5 years ago. And actually the state was being criticized that we weren't doing enough in the area of human trafficking. During the Obama administration, the administration on family service, children and family services, one of their priorities was to ensure that states were beginning to focus on human trafficking, both on sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking, and really wanted to advance that from a state perspective, but providing federal guidance. So that administration really ranked that Delaware was not doing enough in this area. So the General Assembly got involved, and the Senate in particular of Delaware, and started writing legislation to formulate the Human Trafficking Coordinating Council, which was a body that had many representatives from the administrative branch, from the variety of cabinet offices, as well as the Attorney General's office, as well as law enforcement. So really that's when I believe as a state, we really started trying to address the issue of human trafficking. I will tell you, I think we were behind other states, especially in this region. We benefited a lot from looking at what New Jersey had been doing and looking at Pennsylvania and the city of Philadelphia in particular.
I think that we need to go to Ohio because I want to follow up with Jeffrey Barrows on his solution to ending sex trafficking. Do you think human trafficking awareness should be a priority for medical professionals?
I think ideally it should. The problem facing healthcare professionals is that there's so many things that there is expected of them, especially in the emergency room setting. And so if you look at their priorities from their perspective, I mean, obviously proper health care is their number one perspective, especially in emergency, life-threatening situations. So what that does is it tends to push down the priority for things like trafficking. It doesn't mean that they can't address it, but it's just not a priority in their minds. And I can understand that.
How do you think we could make all medical professionals aware of the signs of trafficking as well as how to respond to them when they encounter it?
Well, having thought about this for quite a while, because a lot of people will talk about let's force, and I don't like that word, but really it's what they're saying is to force healthcare professionals to be educated. I don't think that's the right way because we're already having to do a certain amount of continuing medical education to maintain our license. And even doing that, a lot of docs, a lot of nurse practitioners will they'll kind of look at that and say, well, that really doesn't apply to me and I don't need to worry about it. So I think the best approach is through the hospital because it's really hospitals that are mostly encountering these victims, and it's mainly through the emergency departments. So the one thing that gets the attention of hospital administrators is the ongoing accreditation process. They're always thinking about the next accreditation. They're always preparing for it. In fact, it's an ongoing, continual process now. And so if we are able to convince the accreditation agencies, especially the Joint Commission, which is the major accreditation agency in the United States, of the importance of responding to trafficking victims, that will automatically get all the hospitals on board, and then the hospitals will get their staff on board, not only the physician staff, the nurse practitioner staff, nursing staff, all the ancillary personnel. They will then be trained on it, and a proper response, I think, will come about.
How was the recovery process after you left New York?
Long and hard, I mean, I didn't tell anyone what I had experienced. No one. I kept it all in. I told no one because I carried a deep shame and guilt because I thought it was all my fault and all my idea. And once again, it's a very slick crime because traffickers know that victims think that, and they know they're not going to go testify against them or go running into a police station and go, help me, I'm being trafficked. I didn't even know what that term meant.
Would you mind talking a little bit about the rehabilitation process?
First part of it is really getting them into a place where they're safe, where they can feel comfortable talking about what happened to them. The one thing about sexual exploitation is if there's so much shame associated with it, especially if somebody is not familiar with it. So when you're in a place where all the staff understand it and other girls that are there have been through it themselves, it provides an environment where the girls are more likely and have freedom to share and open up about what their own personal experiences are. They're in a safe place. They can get back in school. They can begin to see and learn what's happened to them. And again, through their counseling, they can begin to stabilize until they get into the next step after our care.
Just to quickly kind of recap the things that we've talked about today, some of the most important things are, one, this rehabilitation process that we just discussed for the survivors, and then the other is the solution of accreditation companies stepping in and sort of mandating the human trafficking response protocol. How long do you think it will take to see these two things be widespread and national?
I'd be thrilled to see it in the next 10 years, frankly. I've been involved in the anti-trafficking movement for 15 years now, and I've seen some progress. I've not nearly seen what I would have hoped in 15 years. I do see that state governments now have laws against trafficking, especially child sex trafficking. Still, some states need to pass what we call safe harbor laws that provide special care for the minors. The whole healthcare industry is really being slow and taking on their responsibility in identifying and helping these victims. Unfortunately, I do think that eventually they will, because most people in healthcare do care about helping people. That's why they got into it, but they just haven't seen this as a priority like they should. But if in 10 years every hospital in this country had a good, solid, complete response protocol in place to identify and assist victims of trafficking, I would be thrilled. And then that would help them get other organizations or agencies that need to come alongside and help these victims, get them up and running, get communities aware of the need, and begin to serve these survivors.
Do you think that we can eradicate trafficking within this lifetime?
I try to be very optimistic. I don't think so, but I think we can cut it back substantially. The reason I don't think so is because there are too many hidden pockets in the world, right? Even in our own state. But if we work hard and we implement laws and we make sure that there's constant awareness and we don't hide from the truth, we can cut it back significantly to the point that it is something that is an outlier, as opposed to now where it's growing in prevalence and so many people are being affected either personally or because they have a family member or friend who's been touched.
I am hopeful we could, but I feel as though human trafficking is probably not all that new. We call it modern day slavery, but I believe it's been going on, over our time. What I hope is that through this now level of attention, education, that we can prevent as best we can. We do know that we can intervene and that recovery is possible.
Honestly, I would have to say no, because to eradicate child or any kind of trafficking means we have to get rid of evil. And I don't see that happening in our lifetime. Evil is a whole nother issue. There are always going to be pockets of it. Certainly we can make it less. Certainly we can lessen, for instance, child sex trafficking by lessening child abuse. But completely eradicating it, I don't believe we're going to see that in this world.
Yes. I mean, emphatically, yes. I believe that just in the short time that I've been doing this and seeing the responses to the outreach, the responses from all the first responders, the police department kind of jumping in, the legislation changes that we've had in such a short time, and it's blooming. I mean, it's in the media now. You see it all over social media everywhere. So I think it's just one of those things that it's been hidden for way too long, and now's the time. So it's coming out now.
That's probably one of the places where we do disagree. Human trafficking, what's happening right now is very similar to what happened in domestic violence 20 years ago, where before law enforcement, judicial systems were just like, it's a personal problem, they'll take care of it. Now, or even on a personal issue, you just kind of turned a blind eye to it, and now it's being exposed.
Given everything that you know, given the life that you've lived and all the experiences you've had, do you believe that we can end trafficking in the U.S. within this lifetime?
No. But I do think that we could make a dent and help both the victims and the survivors of sex trafficking, and through education, through awareness and education, we can help young men and young women better understand how to treat each other with kindness, compassion, and as fellow human beings,